She was my daughter, my only child, and she looked at me like I was the enemy. "You'll never control me again," she screamed as the courtroom door slammed behind her. The judge's ruling had just given me temporary custody of her son, my grandson. And I sat there shaking, not from triumph, but from heartbreak. After 28 years of raising her, protecting her, sacrificing for her, I had become the threat. And all I'd done was try to save her child. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The heavy oak door slammed so hard behind Chloe that the stained glass panels rattled in their frame. The sharp echo silenced the courtroom for a beat. Even the clerk stopped typing. Heads turned toward the noise, but no one moved to follow her. Helen didn't flinch. She remained seated at the petitioner's table, spine straight, eyes fixed on the white paper resting in front of her, Judge Ellis's signature still wet at the bottom of the custody order. Her hand didn't reach for it. Not yet. Instead, she reached for the blue backpack sitting beside her chair, Caleb's name stitched crookedly on the front. The murmur started low. Whispers among observers and attorneys trickled across the benches like static. People leaned in. Some stared at Helen, others toward the doors where Chloe had disappeared in a blur of fury and eyeliner. Helen exhaled once, slow, measured, and picked up the paper with trembling fingers. But it wasn't the document that made her hand shake. It was the sound of Chloe's voice still ringing in her ears. "You'll never control me again." Not, "You can't have him." Not, "This isn't fair." Just that, like she thought this had anything to do with control. Beside her, Maya Brenner, calm and composed in her court-appropriate gray cardigan, leaned slightly toward Helen and murmured, "That went smoother than I expected." Helen gave a dry, humorless smile. Depends on how you define smooth. Maya's eyes flicked toward the door. "She didn't accuse you of kidnapping this time. That was something." Helen slid the custody order into a file folder, then gently placed Caleb's backpack on her lap. It was lighter than she remembered. He hadn't brought much when Chloe dropped him off 3 weeks ago. A toothbrush, 1 set of pajamas, a crumpled coloring book with half the pages ripped out. She ran her hand across the bag, feeling the outline of the small stuffed bear Caleb carried everywhere, the one Chloe used to call that grimy thing. Helen had washed it 3 times already. Caleb cried the first time, convinced it wouldn't smell like home anymore. Home. A word that had lost its shape over time. The judge's bench cleared. The bailiff called the next case. Helen didn't move. She just held the backpack tighter, like it might anchor her to something solid. "You okay?" Maya asked softly. Helen nodded once. "Yeah, just letting the moment land." The truth was, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing in the middle of a battlefield after the first cannon fired. What she'd won today was temporary. The paperwork said so, but it was enough to get Caleb out of that house, out of Logan's shadow, out of Chloe's chaos. She could still feel the heat of Chloe's rage, the way her daughter's eyes had scanned the courtroom like a trapped animal. Helen had expected anger. She hadn't expected that scream so raw it had cracked something inside her. Caleb's backpack shifted in her lap. She held it tighter. Maya watched her with a measured gaze. "You did the right thing." Helen blinked slowly. "I never wanted control," she whispered. "I wanted him safe." Silence settled again. As Helen finally stood and turned to leave the courtroom, her eyes flicked up and caught someone watching her from the back row. A man in a navy suit, leaning against the wall, arms folded, Logan. He hadn't been present during the hearing. No legal standing yet, no visible connection. But there he was, watching her with a flat, unreadable stare. No rage, no expression, just calculation. Helen's chest tightened. Maya saw it too. "Do you want to wait here while I get the car?" Helen shook her head, eyes still on him. "No, I want him to see I'm not afraid." She walked past him without hesitation. Didn't look back, but she felt it, the chill of his presence, even as sunlight spilled through the courthouse doors. Outside, the air was crisp, fall in full swing. The leaves skittered across the concrete like whispers, and somewhere in the hoary distance, a siren wailed. Helen tucked the custody folder under her arm, adjusted Caleb's backpack, and stepped forward. Behind her, the courthouse door creaked again. She didn't turn, but this time it didn't slam. Helen kept her hand on Caleb's, knee the entire drive home, not for him, for herself. He sat quietly in the back seat, drawing invisible lines on the foggy window with one finger. Occasionally, he'd hum a song without lyrics, the kind of tune kids make up to feel silent, but it didn't fill anything. The radio was off. The world outside buzzed without sound. When they turned onto her street, she saw the shift immediately. 3 neighbors stood bunched at the edge of a driveway, pretending to admire a dying hydrangea bush. A jogger slowed as he passed Helen's mailbox, glancing just a second too long. And the woman 2 houses down, the one who always waved when Helen brought out the trash, ducked inside before Helen could make eye contact. She parked the car and unbuckled Caleb's seatbelt slowly, like pulling a pin out of a grenade, as she lifted his backpack from the seat. Caleb tugged her sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" he asked, voice small. Helen crouched beside him. "No, sweetheart," she said, brushing his curls back from his forehead. "We're okay. No one's in trouble." But even as she said it, her phone buzzed again. 6th time in 5 minutes. Inside the house, she handed Caleb his snack and turned on a quiet cartoon. He curled up on the couch, holding his stuffed bear by one ear, the way he always did when his stomach hurt. Helen stepped into the kitchen, set the phone on the counter, and unlocked it. Chloe's Instagram post, selfie, eyes red, mascara smudged. "She stole my baby. I said I needed time, and she stabbed me in the back, my own mother," beneath it. A flood of heart emojis, sad faces, fire and pitchfork comments. "Call CPS. That woman is toxic. Control freaks shouldn't be grandmas." Helen didn't comment, didn't react. She just opened the Notes app and typed the date, time, and copied the post. Then took a screenshot, then another. This time of the next post, which was already gaining traction. Logan says, "We have a case. I won't stop fighting. If you know a good custody lawyer, DM me." She closed the phone like it might burn her hand. A knock at the door made her flinch. She peered through the peephole. No one, just a manila envelope on the mat. She bent to pick it up. No return address, but inside were 3 blurry printouts of her Facebook posts from years ago. Ones where she'd vented vaguely about family betrayal and learning to set boundaries. No threat, just implication. She dropped it into the kitchen drawer without reading further. Maya called an hour later. "You've seen the internet, I assume?" Helen snorted. "Didn't even need to log in. My neighbor pretended not to see me again. She's painting you like a villain. It's classic misdirection. Stay focused on Caleb. We'll handle the truth in court." Helen leaned against the fridge. "Logan's behind this. I can feel it." Maya paused. "Then start documenting everything. Assume you're being baited." The line went quiet for a moment before Maya added, "Truth has gravity. Helen, don't panic. Just keep pulling it together." That night, after Caleb fell asleep, curled at the foot of her bed, Helen opened her laptop and created a folder, Custody Evidence. She saved the screenshots, copied Chloe's post, pulled every threatening voicemail Logan had ever left Chloe on speakerphone, recordings she'd made just in case. Back then, she'd hoped she'd never need them. And then she saw it. A new comment on Chloe's original post. Anonymous account. "You want real dirt on Helen? Message me. You don't know the half of it." Helen's stomach flipped. She clicked on the profile. No name, just an account with 2 followers and 1 blurry profile photo of what looked like a rusted-out pickup. The post vanished before she could screenshot it. Helen sat frozen, her fingers hovering above the mousepad. Logan. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was moving, and something told her this wasn't about Chloe anymore. 3 weeks ago, the front door had closed with a casual click, not a slam. "I'll be back Sunday night," Chloe had said, brushing a kiss across Caleb's cheek without making eye contact. Her fingers trembled as she pushed the hood of her sweatshirt up over her damp hair. Helen stood in the doorway, holding her breath. "You sure you're okay?" "I just need a break, that's all," Chloe muttered, eyes fixed on the porch steps. "It's not a big deal." Then she was gone. Sunday came and went. No call, no text, no Chloe. Helen's messages bounced between silence and blue bubbles. "You on your way? Everything okay? Caleb's asking for you." Each one more brittle than the last. Finally, she dialed Logan. He picked up on the second ring. "She needs space," he said, casually, like Helen had asked if it was raining. "Space from what? Her son? She's processing stuff. Give her time. I'll tell her you called." The line went dead. Helen stared at the phone like it had betrayed her. By the following Friday, Caleb had stopped asking when Mommy would be back. He'd started wetting the bed again. That weekend, she'd found the first bruise, a small fading yellow one under his left arm while helping him into the bath. When she asked about it, he just shrugged and said, "I think I bumped the wall." Then came the night terrors. Screaming. Fits, bolting upright in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, whispering, "Don't let him in," before curling under the covers. Helen started writing everything down, every bruise, every nightmare. She took photos with the date and time. When Caleb clung to her during drop-off at preschool and cried uncontrollably, Helen made sure the teacher logged it. Maya had once told her, "If you can't protect them from pain, protect them with paper." So she did. The day she filed for emergency custody, it rained so hard she could barely see the courthouse steps. Caleb sat beside her in the waiting room, swinging his legs and humming that same tuneless melody he used to comfort himself. Helen's hands were clammy around the folder she'd put together. Police non-response logs, preschool incident notes, and the beginnings of a timeline. No accusation, just the truth, ugly and raw. The court gave her temporary custody that same afternoon, and just like that, Chloe reappeared. Helen answered the knock at her door to find her daughter standing on the porch like nothing had happened. Hoodie, sunglasses, arms crossed. "You filed for custody? Seriously?" "I didn't know if you were coming back," Helen said quietly. "You left?" "I trusted you," Chloe hissed. "He needed a break, that's all. We both did. He needed safety," Helen snapped. Back, her voice trembling now. "You both do," Chloe laughed. That sharp, joyless laugh Helen hadn't heard since Chloe was 15 and trying to convince her that a bottle of vodka in her closet belonged to a friend. "You want to fix this with a therapist?" "Fine," Helen offered. "Family counseling, neutral space." "You think I need therapy now?" "I think we all do." Chloe turned without answering. Her shoulders were shaking, but whether from rage or grief, Helen couldn't tell. 2 days later in the courtroom, Helen told the truth. She kept her tone measured, not cold, just factual. She described the patterns, the withdrawal, the signs Caleb was slipping into something dark and quiet no child should understand. She didn't mention the bruises. Not yet. Chloe, dressed in soft pastels and clutching a tissue, told a different story about pressure, about control, about a mother who couldn't let go. The judge listened. Maya sat beside Helen, still and silent. And the envelope with the real evidence, the photos, the hospital notes, the therapist's preliminary report, stayed sealed in Helen's briefcase, not because she doubted it, but because, once it came out, there was no putting it back. Now, back in the present, Helen opened that envelope again. The bruises were clearer in print than on her phone. The medical chart noted suspected environmental stressor or household incident. The therapist's comments were underlined in red, signs consistent with emotional trauma and neglect. She held the papers in both hands, her jaw tight. In the next room, Caleb coughed softly in his sleep. Helen slid the documents back into the envelope and sealed it again. She didn't know exactly when she'd submit it, but she knew this. The next time, Clue lied under oath, she wouldn't be the only one bleeding truth. The episode dropped just after midnight. By sunrise, it had 4,000 plays. Helen didn't hear about it from Facebook or Maya or even the neighbors this time. She heard it from Caleb. "Mommy was on the radio," he said over breakfast, his face sticky with syrup. She said, "You're not nice to her." Helen's hand froze mid-stir in her coffee. Her stomach turned with that sharp, familiar dread, the kind that comes when someone you love is talking, but you know they're not telling the truth. Later that morning, Maya texted, "Podcast is trending. Don't listen unless you have to." She's spinning hard. Helen listened anyway. It was called The Mother Lode, one of those local parenting shows with upbeat music, warm hosts, and half-scripted empathy. "Today we have Chloe Armstrong," the host chirped. "A brave young mother fighting a legal nightmare no parent should ever face." Chloe's voice followed, soft, almost meek, carefully trembling. "I didn't want to do this publicly," she began, "but I have no choice." She paused for effect. You could hear the fake composure cracking. "I dropped my son off for the weekend, and my mom just filed for custody behind my back, like I was dangerous, like I didn't matter." Helen leaned forward in her chair, every muscle taut. Her thumb dug into the ceramic mug until it hurt. "She was always like this," Chloe continued. "Controlling, emotionally unstable. You never knew which version of her you'd get, cold, angry, or just disappointed." There was a manufactured sob, a dramatic silence, and the host murmured, "Take your time." Logan's voice didn't appear, not directly, but Helen could hear him behind Chloe's every word, the way the legal phrasing slipped in. Due process, improper, petition filing, violation of parental autonomy, all spoon-fed from the same man who'd whispered to Chloe that her bruises were her fault for pushing. By the end of the 30-minute episode, Helen's character had been reduced to a textbook villain. The icy matriarch, jealous of her daughter's independence, desperate to relive motherhood through manipulation. It was theater, but dangerous theater. That afternoon, Chloe filed an emergency appeal to overturn the custody ruling. Helen's attorney emailed the notice with a single-line subject, "Appeal in motion, media fueled." Maya came by the house later that evening. "Don't fight fire with fire," she warned, setting her coat on the kitchen chair. "This isn't the time to defend your honor. This is the time to protect Caleb." "I wasn't going to post a rebuttal," Helen muttered. "I just don't want him growing up thinking I stole him." "He won't," Maya said. "Not if the truth stays steady, not if you stay steady." Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves danced across the porch, scratching at the windows. Inside, the house was warm but tense, like even the walls were listening. Helen turned back to the kitchen table, where Caleb sat with a glue stick and paper scraps, building something abstract and colorful. He looked up at her with those wide eyes so full of confusion and trust. "Why is Mommy so mad at you?" he asked quietly. Helen crouched beside him. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "when people are hurting, they get mad at the wrong person, even someone they love." Caleb blinked at her. "Are you mad at her?" Helen shook her head. "No, baby. I'm just sad." He nodded slowly, then pressed a small, red heart onto the paper. "This one's for you," he whispered. Helen's throat tightened. She kissed his hair and stood, forcing a breath out through her nose. Later that night, after Caleb was asleep and Maya had gone, Helen opened her inbox. One new message, no sender, no subject, just 2 lines. "You think podcasts matter? Wait until court hears the real story." Attached was a file labeled Witness West PDF. The peanut butter aisle was quiet, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft squeak of cartwheels. Helen stared at a row of familiar jars, her grocery list clutched tightly in one hand. Creamy, crunchy, organic, none of it mattered. Not this week. Behind her, two voices floated in just out of view. I mean, if she really cared about her daughter, she wouldn't have gone behind her back like that. She's always been a little intense. Helen didn't turn. She didn't have to. The tone told her everything, soft, sanctimonious, whispering like they were passing on classified information rather than gossip in front of the Skippy. She exhaled slowly and picked up the first jar in reach, not even reading the label. Then came a name. Chloe said her mom used to scream at her during holidays. That's trauma, you know. The other woman gasped. I knew something was off, always too composed. People like that hide things. Helen's hand tensed on the cart handle. She turned the corner of the aisle without looking up and nearly bumped into someone at the end cap. A familiar face, Terry Jacob from choir. Mid-50s, glasses always a bit crooked, with the kind of voice that carried in echoey fellowship halls. Terry, she said, giving a tight, awkward smile. Helen. Helen nodded politely. A pause. Not warm, not cruel, just cautious. Terry glanced at Helen's cart. How's Caleb? He's good, sleeping better. That was true most nights. Terry hesitated, then leaned in slightly. It's bad online. I mean, she's convincing them. Helen met her eyes. Convincing them of what? Terry didn't answer, just offered a small, regretful shrug and slipped past her, disappearing into the baking aisle. By the time Helen reached the checkout, she felt like everyone was watching. The cashier smiled too tightly. The woman behind her avoided eye contact. A man in a baseball cap pulled out his phone the moment she stepped forward. Outside, the air was sharp with the first warning of winter. Her breath fogged the windshield as she drove past the church. She caught sight of the reader board. Forgiveness starts with understanding. She almost laughed. Almost. At school pickup the next day, two other moms pulled their children closer. When Caleb came out of the gate, Helen pretended not to notice, even as her jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Mommy, Caleb said, climbing into the back seat. Why did Jenny say we don't live in a real house? Helen turned to look at him. What? She said, You're not my real mom, just a grandma. Helen forced a smile. That's silly, honey. You know who we are. Caleb nodded, but his little face stayed twisted in confusion all the way home. Later that evening, while Helen folded laundry on the couch, he sat at the coffee table scribbling with broken crayons. She didn't think much of it until he quietly slid the paper into her lap. It was a crude drawing, 2 houses on opposite sides of the page, a stick figure under each, one labeled MOM, the other GRANDMA. In the middle, Caleb, drawn with teardrops falling down his round, lopsided face. Helen stared at it. She felt something in her chest fold inward. That night, Maya stopped by unannounced. I saw the drawing, she said gently. He's splitting. He's trying to find where he belongs in this mess. Helen nodded once, eyes glassy. Maya looked at her, carefully. Are you ready to go nuclear if you have to? Helen didn't blink. I've protected her long enough. She walked into the kitchen and pulled the envelope from the drawer. The one with the bruises, the hospital records, the therapist's observations. She didn't even have to check the content. She knew every detail now. They'd burned themselves into her. She placed it on the table. Maya said nothing. Outside, the wind howled, bending the porch light sideways. Inside, Helen looked down at the drawing again. 2 houses, 1 crying boy. Time to burn one of them down. Helen didn't sleep that night. She sat at the dining room table long after Maya had gone, the overhead light casting harsh angles across the worn wood surface. In front of her sat the folder, closed, thick, radiating something poisonous and necessary. The silence in the house felt tight, like it was holding its breath. She finally opened it. Inside was the full hospital report, date-stamped photos of Caleb's bruises from the CPS home, and notes in a nurse's handwriting: patient withdrawn, quiet, flinched during abdominal exam. The therapist's preliminary letter was worse. Patient expresses fear of a male caregiver in the home, refers to nightmares and hiding behavior. Emotional trauma indicators consistent with ongoing exposure to verbal or psychological aggression. Helen pressed her hand to her chest, grounding herself. There was nothing left to debate. She pulled out her phone and called Naomi, her attorney. It was nearly midnight, but Naomi picked up on the second ring. "I'm ready," Helen said. Her voice didn't shake. "I want everything submitted. Judge Ellis needs to see it all." There was a pause. Then Naomi said, "You understand what this means, right? Once this is in the record, it's public. There's no unringing this bell." Helen closed her eyes. "Let it ring." "Okay," Naomi said. "I'll prep the motion, but there's no going back." Helen ended the call and walked to the sideboard drawer. There was a second envelope she hadn't touched in weeks. She slid it open with numb fingers. Inside were screenshots of text messages between Chloe and Logan captured months ago, back when Helen still had access to Chloe's old iCloud backup, a forgotten loophole Chloe never revoked. One message stood out. "Logan, if you keep pushing me like this, I swear to God you'll lose more than your kid." Another read. "You think your mom is the threat? Try living without my paycheck." And one voice memo, barely audible, but unmistakable. Chloe sobbing quietly, whispering, "I'll do whatever you want, just not tonight. Please, Helen." Hit pause. It felt like someone had slammed the air out of her lungs. She'd seen the signs before. Denial layered over dependency, rage deflected, away from the real source. Chloe had always been quick to fight the wrong enemy. But now it was all laid bare. It wasn't just Caleb being cornered. Clue was trapped too, and too ashamed to admit it. Helen closed the second envelope, her decision crystallizing like glass. Even if Chloe never forgave her, even if Caleb asked questions that took years to answer, even if Helen had to be the villain in both their stories, she would still save them. At 2:12 a.m., she emailed the entire folder to Naomi under the subject line for immediate submission, sealed request to Judge Ellis. Then she placed the physical copies into a manila envelope, sealed it tight, and left it by the door for courier. Pickup. As she did, a faint thump came from upstairs, the sound of little feet hitting the floor. A second later, Caleb stood in the hallway, hair tousled, rubbing his eyes. "Bad dream," he mumbled. Helen knelt down and opened her arms. He ran into them. As she held him, her eyes landed on the drawing still sitting on the coffee table. The 2 houses, the crying boy. Not anymore, she thought. Not anymore. The next morning, Judge Sharon Ellis sat behind her desk in chambers, flipping through the sealed folder Naomi had dropped off in person. Her eyes narrowed as she reached the second envelope. The texts, the threats, the audio files. She pressed her intercom. "Have Logan West subpoenaed," she said evenly, immediately. The courtroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was just Helen's blood still frozen from the night before. She sat in the same seat as last time, Naomi on her right, Maya behind her. The bailiff called roll, then stepped back against the wood-paneled wall like he expected fireworks. Judge Sharon Ellis adjusted her glasses and looked down at the bench. "Emergency hearing convened," she began, in light of newly submitted evidence under sealed motion. Logan sat across the aisle, legs spread wide, arms crossed. His tie was too loose, his expression too tight. Chloe sat beside him, far enough to avoid touching, close enough to still look like a team. But Helen saw it instantly, the tremor in Chloe's hand as she smoothed her skirt, the way she avoided Logan's eyes. Judge Ellis spoke again, Mr. West, you've been subpoenaed in connection to emotional and financial coercion allegations tied to both the petitioner's daughter and her grandson. Do you understand the severity of this? Logan's lips curved into a polite, mocking half-smile. I understand being ambushed. Judge Ellis didn't blink. Then you also understand perjury will be prosecuted. Naomi Rose, Your Honor, we ask the court to hear 2 brief exhibits, text transcripts, and audio before proceeding to direct questions. Permission granted. The clerk hit play. Logan's voice filled the room, low, sharp, unmistakable. You think your mom is the threat? Try living without my paycheck. Then Chloe's voice, faint and broken. I'll do whatever you want, just not tonight, please. The silence that followed was crushing. Helen didn't look at Chloe. She didn't need to. She could feel the unraveling in the air, the way shame shifts like a chemical spill, burning, staining, unstoppable once it starts. Judge Ellis looked up. Miss Armstrong, do you contest the authenticity of these messages? Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came. Logan whispered something under his breath. Her eyes flicked toward him, panicked, then louder. They're taken out of context. She asked me to help manage things. She doesn't understand. Mr. West, Ellis said sharply, you will not speak for her. Chloe inhaled sharply and finally spoke, barely above a whisper. They were private. I didn't think she'd keep that stuff. Do you dispute the content? The judge pressed. I hesitated. It's complicated. Is it true you reside with Mr. West? The judge asked. Yes. Effective immediately, you are ordered to vacate that residence. You will be provided emergency support through the family court system. Do you understand? Chloe stared at her like she'd been struck. No, she said, then louder. No, she set this up. My mom. She hacked my stuff. She's trying to turn everyone against me. Her voice cracked. This is all her. She always makes herself the victim. Judge Ellis held up a hand. Enough. Chloe burst into tears, shaking her head, mascara already streaking. Logan stood abruptly. This is bullshit, he muttered. Mr. West, sit down, the bailiff warned. But he was already walking, not storming, just walking, like he was stepping off a sinking ship before anyone else smelled the smoke. As the doors closed behind him, Judge Ellis turned back to the record. Temporary full custody of Caleb Armstrong is granted to Helen Armstrong with immediate effect. All parental visitation for Chloe Armstrong is suspended and shall resume only under court-supervised conditions. Helen closed her eyes. She didn't feel triumph, just a kind of exhausted relief that barely reached her chest. Maya touched her shoulder. Judge Ellis paused before rising. This case is not over, but the protection of the child is clear. We are adjourned. The gavel fell. Helen stood slowly, her knees aching, her heart heavier than ever. Chloe hadn't moved. She just stared, down at the tabletop, jaw trembling. Outside, the hallway was quiet, too quiet. Helen stepped out and saw Logan at the far end, speaking urgently into his phone. He looked up, saw her, and smiled, but it wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was confidence. The picture was small, just black crayon on a page torn from, say, a church bulletin. But it stopped the room cold. Caleb had drawn a house with no windows, just 4 sharp square walls and a jagged roof. In the middle, a little stick figure, arms raised, mouth a long, wide O. Behind the house stood a larger figure, taller, faceless, all in black, arms stretching past its knees. Helen stared at it, stomach tight. Beside her, the therapist, Laura Kim, made a gentle note on her clipboard. This is the 3rd one in 2 weeks, Laura said quietly. Each darker, more confined, and the shadows keep getting longer. Helen nodded, silent. Did he say who the tall figure was? Laura hesitated. He wouldn't name him, but he said the figure. Came when Mommy left and walked too loud. She looked up. He's scared, that's clear, and he's scared of a man. Helen swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her purse strap. He hasn't asked to see Chloe. Laura shook her head. He asked me if she was still trapped. That night, Helen bought a fresh composition notebook. On the front, she wrote the date in black Sharpie and tucked it into her nightstand. She began with small entries, brief notes on Caleb's sleep, what he said in the car, what he didn't say when he was coloring, his appetite, the way he flinched at loud noises, the way he called the hallway nightlight his son. Everything was evidence now, not for the court alone, but for Caleb's future. A week later, Chloe missed her first supervised visit. No call, no explanation, just a no-show. Helen waited in the courthouse parking lot for 25 minutes before a clerk came out with an apologetic shrug and a paper cup of water. The second time it was raining. Caleb wore his new jacket. He carried a laminated drawing for her, a hand-drawn turkey colored wildly off the lines. She never arrived. The therapist logged it. Maya logged it. Naomi logged it. Helen just folded the drawing in half and placed it gently inside her journal. 3 days later, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Sarah Gomez. The name rang somewhere between memory and regret. Chloe's best friend from high school, the one who disappeared during Logan's rise, Helen answered. "Hi, it's Sarah," the voice said quickly. "I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you privately." Helen hesitated. "Are you still in contact with Chloe?" "No, not for a long time. That's kind of why I'm calling." They met at a booth in a back corner of the local diner. Sarah had changed. Shorter hair, sharper eyes, but the nervous energy was familiar. She didn't waste time. "I saw the court posts, the podcast, the photos, all of it." Sarah's eyes were rimmed red. "I kept quiet for too long." Helen studied her. "Why now?" Sarah rubbed her hands together. "Because I was there once in their apartment years ago. I saw Logan shove her hard into the bathroom door." Helen's heart stopped. "I told her to call the cops. She screamed at me to leave, said I was making it worse." Sarah paused. She had this way of protecting him even when he was breaking her down. Helen didn't speak. Sarah pulled something from her purse. A folded notebook page, faded and worn. On it, a single sentence. "It's better when I don't talk back. I found this in her backpack one night before she moved in with him full-time." Helen stared at the paper. Her fingers didn't move to take it. "I'll testify," Sarah said softly. "If this goes to trial, if it helps, Caleb or Chloe." Helen looked at her. "You sure?" Sarah nodded. "I should have done this years ago." Helen finally reached for the page. As she did, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Naomi. Subject: incoming countermotion. Logan just filed for joint custody. He's claiming Helen fabricated the abuse. The video was shaky, just Sarah sitting on the edge of her bed, hair pulled back, no filter, no music. But the internet didn't care about polish. It cared about truth, or at least pain that sounded like it. "I was Chloe's best friend," Sarah began, voice steady but raw. "And I stayed silent when I saw Logan hurt her. I stayed silent when she vanished from our group. When her bruises showed up under makeup, when she started talking like someone who'd been trained, not loved. A pause, a breath. But I won't stay silent now." She named names. She named dates. She showed the notebook page, the one Chloe had written. She didn't call Helen a saint, didn't sugarcoat the past, but she looked straight into the camera and said, whatever Helen did in that courtroom, it was to protect that boy, Caleb, from the same thing Chloe couldn't escape. Don't let this town pick the wrong villain. By noon, it had 12,000 views. By evening, the group chats buzzed louder than Sunday sermon. Helen heard about it from the mail carrier. "Powerful stuff," he said, handing her a stack of bills. Lot of people watching. At the grocery store, a woman she barely recognized from Bible study leaned in near the apples and whispered, "We owe you an apology." She squeezed Helen's hand once, then walked away. That afternoon, Caleb's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Harrow, tall and practical, hugged her at pickup. "No more whispering," she said firmly. "He's safe. We know that now." At home, Helen opened her laptop and saw it for herself. The podcast episode Chloe had recorded was gone. Link dead, social media wiped, post deleted, and Logan. He responded with a wall of text on Facebook, a 1,000-word rant, accusations of manipulation, claims that Helen had weaponized the system, pseudo-legal nonsense about parental alienation, and revenge custody. But what people noticed most was what wasn't there. Chloe. She never liked or shared it. 3 hours later, Logan's account disappeared completely. Naomi called at dusk. "You're winning," she said. "Not just in court. Public opinion swinging hard. Sarah's video closed the gap." Helen stood by the window, watching Caleb chase fireflies in the backyard. "The court won't need convincing anymore," Naomi added. Helen exhaled. "Good, but Chloe still does." There was a long pause on the line. "You think she'll come back?" Helen didn't answer, but she hoped. That night, just after 10:30, Helen's phone buzzed with a text she didn't expect to see. "Chloe, can we talk? Just us. No lawyers, no Maya. I need a way out, quietly." Helen stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering. Then came the second message. "Please, I can't do this publicly. I don't want to be humiliated." And a third. "But I don't want him anymore either." Helen walked outside barefoot, the porch boards creaking beneath her. The air was heavy, the kind that comes before a late summer storm. The smell of wet earth lingered in the wind. Across the yard, Caleb was sleeping soundly now, a blanket thrown over his small frame on the couch. Maya's voice echoed in her mind. "Are you ready to go nuclear if you have to?" But maybe nuclear wasn't the answer anymore. Maybe something quieter was. Helen opened the message thread, took a breath, and typed, "Tell me where you are." The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly above the broken doorframe of Sunrise, in a name so ironic it felt cruel. Helen parked 2 spaces from room 8 and killed the engine. The lot was nearly empty except for a rusted pickup and an idling minivan. Beyond the cracked sidewalk, the trees shifted in the dark like they didn't want to be seen either. She sat still for a moment. The radio clicked as it cooled. Then the door creaked open. Clue stood in the yellow glow of the doorway, wrapped in an oversized hoodie and wearing flip-flops despite the cool wind. Her left hand gripped the edge of the doorframe. Helen stepped out slowly. For the first time in months, Chloe didn't look angry. She looked erased. Inside, the room was stale with cigarette smoke and something chemical beneath it. Bleach, maybe. Helen didn't ask how long she'd been there. She just looked at her daughter. Really looked. The bruise on Chloe's hand was fresh, purple, blue, and swollen across her knuckles. He slammed the drawer on it. Chloe said before Helen could ask, "Said I was getting sloppy." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was matter-of-fact, like she was talking about the weather. Helen didn't speak. She walked over and unwrapped her coat, then held it open. Chloe hesitated only a second before stepping into it. The gesture was too familiar, too raw, like muscle memory born in darker times. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Chloe sat down on the motel bed, stared at the floor, and said, "I don't deserve your help." Helen sat beside her. "You deserve better than what you settled for." That was all. No lecture, no "I told you so." Just that. A silence settled. But it wasn't stiff or punishing. It was tired, honest. "I'm scared," Chloe whispered after a while. "I don't even know who I am without him. He always told me I was the problem." "You're not," Helen replied. "Chloe yelled at Caleb," she said suddenly, choking on the words. "One night, I was so tired and Logan kept texting and Caleb spilled juice on his laptop and I just—" She covered her face. I screamed so loud he started crying and ran under the table like an animal. Helen swallowed, heart cracking in places that had never fully healed. You can't undo what's happened, but you can choose what happens next. I don't want to be that person again. Then don't be. Helen reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper, a list of contacts. Maya, a trauma counselor, a shelter with private intake, even a women's support group that met on Wednesdays at a church downtown. "We don't have to go public," Helen said. "Not yet, but we have to go forward." Chloe's hand shook as she reached for the paper. She stared at it like it might explode. Then slowly, gently, she leaned into her mother's shoulder. Not all the way, but enough. Enough that Helen could feel her daughter's ribs moving with each trembling breath. "I'm sorry," Chloe whispered. Helen said nothing, just held her there. Outside, a siren passed in the distance, then faded. Inside, for the first time in years, Chloe let herself be still. After a while, she pulled back and wiped her face. "You'll help me disappear just until I can get my feet under me." Helen nodded. "You'll need therapy, a plan, and rules." "I know," Chloe said. "And a toothbrush. I left mine at his place." They both let out a small, surprised laugh. It didn't fix anything, but it didn't break more. Chloe stood and hugged her mother fully, then, arms tight, face pressed into Helen's shoulder like she used to do as a child after nightmares. And just as Helen started to think they'd turned a corner, Chloe whispered, "He's not going to let me go that easy." The courthouse felt different this time, still cold, still sterile. But today, it held something Helen hadn't felt in months. A pulse. The gallery was fuller than usual. Familiar faces, strangers, maybe even a few who once believed Chloe's podcast story. Now they sat in silence, waiting, watching. At the front, Judge Sharon Ellis shuffled papers with deliberate calm. Beside her, the bailiff adjusted his posture. Everything felt slower, like time was stretching to contain something big. Chloe sat at the witness table in a fitted navy blazer, her bruises mostly faded, her makeup subtle. Her hands were clasped. In her lap, knuckles white, but her chin was lifted. Maya gave her a slight nod from the back row. Naomi leaned toward Helen. "We're prepared. You just breathe." Helen stared forward, jaw tight. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore, but she wasn't relaxed either. Then Judge Ellis said, "Miss Armstrong, you may begin." Chloe stood. The room held its breath. "I used to think my mother ruined my life," she began, her voice cracking at the edges but holding steady. "That she was the reason I didn't trust anyone. That she controlled me, smothered me." A pause. She blinked fast but didn't look away from the judge. That wasn't true. A murmur flickered through the back of the courtroom. "I chose someone who broke me in pieces I couldn't name. And every time my mom tried to pull me out, I clawed harder to stay in." She turned slightly toward Helen now, and when she fought for Caleb, I hated her for it because she was doing what I should have done, what I couldn't do. Helen's throat tightened, but she didn't move. Chloe's voice softened. She didn't steal him. She saved him and me. There it was, the apology. Not just for the courtroom, but for the story Chloe had once told to a microphone instead of her mother. "For what it's worth," Chloe said, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry for not being the mother he needed, and for not being the daughter you deserved." She sat down. No one clapped. No one needed to. Even silence, when true, can sound like thunder. Across the aisle, Logan leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously. But his lawyer, sharp suit, thinning hair, a man clearly done playing defense, stood and addressed the bench. Your Honor, my client is withdrawing all motions for joint custody, he gasped, audible ones. He will no longer contest guardianship. Then the lawyer placed his folder on the table and added, "And I'm withdrawing from representation. Effective." Immediately. Logan's head snapped up. What? But the lawyer was already gathering his coat. Judge Ellis raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. West. You are still under court order until the ruling is finalized. He sat, but not quietly. He muttered, under his breath, the entire time. Chloe resumed her seat. Helen kept her eyes on her daughter. Not Logan, not the judge, Chloe. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a survivor. Maya rose next, placing a folder on the table with final document therapy summaries, missed visitation logs, restraining order violations, and follow-up reports from the trauma count. Judge Ellis read in silence for nearly 3 minutes. Then she looked up. This court finds overwhelming evidence that temporary guardianship has been both appropriate and protective. Furthermore, the mother, Miss Chloe Armstrong, has demonstrated accountability and commitment to healing. Helen's heart thumped hard, but is not yet in a position to safely resume full custody. Silent. Helen Armstrong is hereby granted permanent guardianship of Caleb Armstrong, effective immediately. A beat. Chloe Armstrong is granted reunification therapy and weekly supervised sessions, pending psychological assessment review. Gasps again, but softer this time. Ellis turned to Logan. You are barred from all contact, direct or indirect, with Caleb Ms. Armstrong or Helen Armstrong until further notice. Logan didn't react, didn't speak, just stared straight ahead like the room had vanished around him. Later outside, as Helen waited with Caleb near the bench out front, he tugged on her sleeve. Look, he whispered. He handed her a folded paper from his pocket. It was a drawing, a sun, 2 smiling stick figures labeled Mom and Grandma holding hands. Caleb stood between them. No tears this time, just a green hill under their feet and a big blue sky above. Helen felt something deep inside begin to unclench. Then she turned and saw Chloe standing by the courthouse door, watching quietly, waiting. The apartment was small, barely 600 square feet, with scuffed hardwood floors and a heater that groaned, like an old man in the morning. But it had a lot Chloe could control. Windows that opened and a front door that faced the sun. It was hers. Helen helped her move in on a Saturday. No moving truck, just a borrowed SUV, a handful of boxes, and the kind of quiet that didn't sting anymore. They unpacked mostly in silence, Helen setting up dishes while Chloe arranged books she hadn't read in years. At one point, they both reached for the same photo frame, their hands brushed and neither flinched. Progress comes like that, not with a speech, but with a pause. That evening, Helen stayed long enough to set up Caleb's corner. A soft rug, a pile of books, a few toys, and the blanket he still refused to sleep without. Chloe stood in the doorway as Helen folded the last corner under. I thought he'd be scared, Chloe said softly. Staying here. He wasn't, Helen said. You were. Chloe nodded, said nothing. They didn't hug when Helen left. They didn't need. Toward the next morning, Caleb bounded down Helen's front steps with his backpack swinging and his coat half-zipped. We made pancakes, he shouted, and Mommy let me flip mine even though it hit the floor. Helen looked up to see Chloe in the car, waving shyly. She didn't get out, but she waited until Caleb was safely inside before driving off. That night, Helen found the house too quiet. For the first time, she didn't dread the stillness. Instead, she opened a bottle of red wine, poured exactly 1 glass, and sat in her reading chair without checking the baby monitor or logging court documents. She wasn't watching her back anymore. She was watching forward. Midweek, Chloe emailed Helen a color-coded spreadsheet, Caleb's week-to-week transition plan, alternating weekends, Thursday dinners, Saturday park days with both of them if Caleb requested. No mediation, no attorneys, just a note at the bottom. Let me know what doesn't work for you. I want this to feel fair for all of us. On Thursday, Caleb slept through the night at Chloe's for the first time. No nightmare, no nightlights moved in the dark. Helen didn't call to check in. She didn't have to. The next morning, her mail included a small lavender envelope addressed in Chloe's handwriting. Inside, a simple card, 3 words, "Thank you for staying." Helen closed the card and pressed it to her chest. Then she tucked it into her nightstand next to Caleb's old drawings, the ones with tears and the one with the sun. That afternoon, Maya came by with a final copy of the case file in a manila folder and her standard clipboard under one arm. "It's rare I say this," she said, "but I think my work here is done." Helen gave a tired smile. "Feels like mine's just beginning." Maya studied her. "You know, this isn't just a win in court. You held a boundary that didn't destroy the relationship. That's not small." Helen nodded. "It almost did, but it didn't." Mia paused in the doorway. "You're not the same woman I met in the waiting room 3 months ago." Helen exhaled. She didn't sleep through the night. Maya smiled. And now Helen looked toward the hallway where Caleb's shoes were by the door and the lights were off and the silence didn't feel dangerous anymore. She said, "She does." As Maya left, the sun dipped low behind the trees. A soft breeze rolled through the open window, and for the first time since all of it began, the house felt like a home again. Tuesday mornings began with Chloe's parenting class. She never complained about the early hour or the fact that it was held in the basement of the community center with flickering lights and too many folding chairs. She brought her own coffee, kept a notebook, and always sat near the front. Sometimes Helen would drive her there, silently, waiting in the parking lot with a paperback and no need to read it. Other days, Chloe took the bus. Therapy followed twice a week, one-on-one sessions where she came out looking drained but lighter, like something toxic had been bled out and replaced with breath. It wasn't fast. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Caleb began adjusting too. He stopped clinging at drop-offs, stopped flinching at loud noises. At school, his drawings changed. Still wild and messy, but now filled with dogs, rockets, and stick-figure families smiling beneath giant lopsided trees. Helen became part of the pickup rotation. No longer the emergency contact, just a regular face in the carpool lane. She learned the names of the other grandmothers. She brought snacks on Thursdays. No one whispered anymore. They just waved. On Sundays, Chloe started bringing over a casserole. The first week it was burnt, the second week undercooked. By the third, it was edible and almost good. They sat around Helen's table like they used to, Caleb fidgeting with his napkin, Chloe sipping water too fast. Helen watched both of them like they might vanish if she blinked too long. It wasn't warm. Not yet. But it was warmer. Progress again. Not. With a speech. Just a pause. Helen noticed the difference, most on the quiet days. The days when Logan's name didn't come up. Not from Caleb, not from Chloe, not from herself. It was as if the shadow had finally stopped stretching. One afternoon, after school, Caleb handed her something carefully folded and sealed with a Spider-Man sticker. She opened it. Inside was a crayon-drawn card that read in colorful, crooked letters, "World's Best Grandma." Even when she's tired, Helen laughed so hard she cried, and Caleb looked horrified. "Is it wrong?" he asked. She scooped him up into her arms. "No, baby, it's perfect." The following Sunday, the church sanctuary buzzed louder than usual. It was homecoming week, a service for lapsed members and prodigal sons and daughters. The place was packed with old smiles and cautious eyes. Helen sat near the front as always, Caleb beside her, swinging his legs under the pew. Then the murmurs started, heads turned. Chloe was walking down the center aisle, hair pulled back neatly, no makeup, a soft blue dress that fluttered just above her knees. She sat beside Helen like she'd never left. The sermon began. Songs were sung, hands were held during prayer, and then in a moment unscripted and unseen, Helen reached out and gently took Chloe's hand. Chloe squeezed it. Their eyes met, and both smiled through tears neither of them wiped away. Later, after the service, Pastor Ellis, Judge Ellis's older brother, welcomed Chloe back with no questions, no lecture, just a nod and a warm handshake. "You're home," he said. That night, Helen found Chloe sitting on the porch steps, mug in hand. "I forgot how quiet peace sounds," Chloe whispered. Helen sat beside her, pulled a blanket around both of them, and said, "It's quieter when you've earned it." They didn't say more. They didn't need to. But upstairs in Caleb's room, the nightlight stayed off. The invitation came on pale cream stationery with a handwritten note clipped to the top. "We believe your voice could save someone who hasn't found hers yet." Helen almost said no. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't a counselor. She wasn't even sure she was brave. But Maya said, "Sometimes it's not about who you are, it's about what you survived." So Helen agreed. The event was held in the community hall of a retired school building. The gym was converted with strings of soft yellow lights and folding chairs dressed up with bows. A chalkboard still hung on one wall, dusty and unused, like time had been. Paused there, the fundraiser's theme, "Start where you are." When it was her turn, Helen walked slowly to the microphone. She wore no makeup, no heels, just the navy cardigan Caleb had spilled juice on once, the stain still faint near the cuff. She stood behind the podium, took a breath, and said, "I'm not here as a hero or a martyr or a perfect mother." The room stilled. "I'm here because I fought my daughter for my grandson, and it saved us." All gasps came from nowhere in particular, but they weren't shocked. They were real. The kind people make when someone finally says the thing that's been living, unsaid, in their own chest. "I didn't want to take anything away from her," Helen continued, voice steady now. "I wanted to give her something she didn't know she needed. A chance to heal, a second start, a light she could walk toward without someone else blocking the switch." She didn't say Logan's name. She didn't have to. The room knew. Helen's voice didn't tremble, but it never hardened either. She told the truth, not with rage, but with grace. She told them about the first bruise, the missing days, the courtroom. She told them about the motel, the drawing with the tears, the Sunday morning when her daughter came back to church with a dress that fluttered. No one clapped. They didn't need to. But when she stepped off the stage, women rose from their chairs. Dozens of them. One by one, they came forward. Some hugged her. Some just held her hand for a beat longer than polite. Some whispered stories they'd never said aloud. "My sister went through this. My daughter is still with him. I didn't know I was allowed to leave." And behind them, standing against the far wall, Chloe wept silently. She didn't speak. She didn't wave, but her eyes never left her mother. Later, that evening, Pastor Ellis took the mic. "She's the iron in this town's spine," he said with a half smile. "And if we're smart, we'll start listening to the women who've been holding us upright all along." The mayor clapped first, then the room followed. 2 weeks later, Helen stood on the town hall steps next to a podium draped in bunting, a crowd of families and city workers filling the square. The mayor held up a plaque in recognition of her courage, compassion, and relentless commitment to protecting the vulnerable. This year's Citizen of the Year award goes to Helen Armstrong. Helen stepped up, smiled politely, and accepted the plaque with both hands. The cameras flashed, the microphone buzzed. She leaned toward it, unsure what to say. Then she cleared her throat. "I didn't save my grandson alone." Pause. "I didn't even save my daughter alone." Another breath. "We saved each other. One impossible, imperfect decision at a time." From the third row, Chloe stood next to Caleb, her hand on his shoulder. Helen's voice softened. I'm not the strongest woman in this town. I'm just one who stopped waiting for someone else to be. The applause was loud, but not as loud as what Helen felt blooming in her chest. That night, Helen placed the plaque on the bookshelf next to Caleb's crayon drawing, the one with the blue sky and green hill. Then, she sat at the kitchen table, poured herself a cup of tea, and waited. At 8:03 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Chloe, holding a folder, her face serious, her hand shaking slightly. I want to co-sign the custody agreement, she said. Not to take anything back, just to say I'm ready to be part of this now. Helen blinked, then opened the door wider. Come in, she said. Let's write the next part together. Caleb's 7th birthday fell on a Sunday. Blue skies, warm wind, a backyard, strung with paper lanterns and handmade signs that read, You are loved big, in finger-painted letters. Chloe made the cake, lopsided but proud. Helen handled the guest list. They shared cleanup duty without one stepping on each other's toes. There were no themes, just laughter. Both houses had come together to plan it. Helen's kitchen for baking, Chloe's apartment for crafting, Caleb's school for extra folding chairs. Maya even dropped off party favors with little notes. Resilience is the best superpower. When the candles were blown out and the juice boxes emptied, Chloe stood near the porch steps with a paper plate in one hand and a glass of lemonade in the other. She cleared her throat. Can I say something? The group quieted. Chloe turned to Helen, then back to the guests. Some who had once doubted her, most who had stayed. I used to think my mother was the problem, she said, voice steady. Turns out she was the solution I didn't know how to ask for. Helen's eyes welled, but she didn't look away. Chloe raised her lemonade to second chances and to the woman who gave me mine. They clinked glasses in silence. Later, while the kids chased bubbles and Maya helped someone fix the Bluetooth speaker, Helen handed Caleb a flat-wrapped package. He ripped it open with sticky fingers, a leather-bound journal, soft brown cover, stitched edges, unlined. What is it? He asked. Helen knelt beside him. It's for when the words are hard. You don't have to say everything out loud, but you should still get to say it. Caleb flipped through the blank pages. I can draw on it too. Especially then, he hugged it to his chest. Will you read it? Only if you want me to. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lantern sagged from too much breeze, Caleb brought Helen a drawing he'd done in the journal. A family tree, not a traditional one, not lines and branches, just 3 figures at the base of a large spiraling trunk. One labeled Mom, one Grandma, and in between a little smiling boy holding both their hands. Underneath, in wobbly crayon, were the roots now. Helen folded the drawing and placed it on the fridge with the strongest magnet she owned. After the dishes were done, Chloe joined her outside. They walked the perimeter of the yard, soft grass under bare feet, arms brushing, lightly. They didn't talk about the motel or the courthouse or the bruises. They talked about school supplies, about the fall festival, about maybe someday adopting a dog. At the far end of the lawn, Chloe stopped. Her voice was soft but certain. I'll never scream at you again. Helen turned toward her, smiled gently. No need. They stood under the sky for a while, the quiet folding around them like a blanket. No more court dates, no more media, just the slow return of ordinary life, one gentle moment at a time. The porch light clicked on behind them. Caleb's laughter echoed faintly through the open windows as he recited bedtime stories to himself. And Helen, once the ice queen, the villain, the desperate matriarch, stood beside her daughter with nothing left to prove, just something left to share. Because the truth had survived, because healing had bloomed where silence once lived. And, as they turned back toward the house, Helen thought, not of what had been taken, but of what had been built. The judge made the decision, but we chose the healing.